What if I told you that Prince William, yes, the future King of England, signed a secret royal decree at midnight that effectively erased his own brother from the royal bloodline? No press release, no televised speech, not even a whisper from Buckingham Palace. Just the soft rustle of legal parchment, the scratch of a fountain pen, and the clink of a seal, pressed down with finality by a man who once shared bunk beds and birthday cakes with the brother he just dethroned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Sounds like something out of Shakespeare, right? And yet, it happened. Because on one unassuming night, under the ghostly hush of the London skyline, Prince William summoned his inner king, not out of duty, but out of desperation. Desperation to protect the crown from his own blood. But why now? Why midnight of all times? And perhaps most haunting of all, why Prince George? Why was the weight of centuries of royal power, influence, and titles suddenly transferred to a child who just recently learned the difference between algebra and ancient ancestry? The whispers started hours before sunrise. Palace staff arriving early for morning prep found corridors unusually quiet. Guards were repositioned. Lights glowed from the east wing of Kensington Palace long past the witching hour. And someone important, was missing. Prince Harry. Gone from the family WhatsApp group. Scrubbed from the official royal website. Erased from the press briefings. As if he had never existed. And yet, this wasn't just about erasing a name. This was about reassigning power, transferring legacy, and delivering a message so loud and final, it echoed through every corner of Windsor and across the Atlantic to Montecito. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind. Because to understand the Midnight Decree, we have to understand the Midnight Descent, the tragic unraveling of the royal brothers, the growing distance, the mounting shame, and the final straw that turned William from heir to executioner. And here's where the real story begins. It starts, oddly enough, with silence. Not the silence of media blackouts or royal non-comments. Not even the passive silence of brothers avoiding each other at family funerals. No, this was a different kind of silence. The kind that fills a room just before a storm. The kind that makes even seasoned aides double-check their non-disclosure agreements. It was late November. King Charles, for the first time in weeks, was publicly absent due to undisclosed health reasons. Camilla had canceled 3 engagements. Kate Middleton was unusually guarded in her appearances. And William? William had gone quiet. There were no leaked photos of him dropping George and Charlotte at school. No surprise visits to charities. No Instagram posts showing his ever-relatable dad side. Just quiet. Until the night of the decree. Now, if you've been following the royal saga over the past 5 years, you know that things have been, let's say, turbulent. Harry and Meghan's 2020 exit from royal duties wasn't just a departure, it was a detonation. They didn't just move continents, they moved allegiances. From palace protocol to Netflix deals. From garden tea parties to Oprah interviews. From stiff upper lip silence to podcast grievances. And William? He watched. He endured. He hoped, some say naively, that his brother would come back around. That the tide would turn. But instead, the scandals multiplied. The headlines worsened. The monarchy's public trust, already shaky, began to tilt. And then came the moment no one could deny. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex started speaking as if they were victims of a villainous regime, one headed by William himself. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was existential. Because when you're second in line to the throne, public perception is power. And for the first time, William's grasp on the monarchy's future felt slippery. Now here's the part the media hasn't told you. The decision to strip Harry's titles didn't begin as revenge. It began as protection. Protection for the crown. For the line of succession. For a 10-year-old boy named George who had recently begun asking questions no child should ever need to ask. Like, why do people online say Uncle Harry hates us? Why do my classmates talk about family feuds? Will people boo me when I grow up? You see, for all the pomp and gold embroidery of royalty, it all comes down to this. Legacy. And Prince William, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin and was thrust into duty far too young, had sworn that his son would never suffer the same fate. Not on his watch. Not again. But still, why midnight? Why the secrecy? Why issue a legal document in the middle of the night? without press, fanfare, or confirmation from the reigning monarch. Well, here's where things turn dark. Sources close to the royal household claim that King Charles had entered what insiders are calling a regency buffer period, a constitutional limbo where the monarch is technically incapacitated but not officially abdicated. Which means William had room to move. Limited, but just enough. Enough to issue an emergency writ, a royal decree passed via privy seal in the event of monarchical delay. It's rare, it's risky, and it's almost always reserved for war or internal collapse. And yet, William used it, not to declare war on a foreign enemy, but to sever ties with his brother. The document was just 19 pages, titled Heritage Reassignments under Contingency of Succession. It contained no accusatory language, no dramatic claims, just 3 signatures, one from William, one from a senior aide, and one from a royal legal clerk whose identity remains confidential. The effects, however, were anything but quiet. Within hours, internal palace servers updated George's official page. He now held the ceremonial suffixes of Earl of Dumbarton and Baron Kilkeel, both previously associated with Harry. More tellingly, the title Duke of Sussex was marked as dormant until further notice. No public explanation, no rebuttal from the Sussexes, just a single shift in silence. And in that silence, a storm. Because royal watchers, former aides, constitutional scholars, and even late-night talk show hosts began asking the same question. What just happened? Was this legal? Was it emotional sabotage? Or was this, the one move William never wanted to make, the only way left to protect the crown? And what about George? What happens when a 10-year-old becomes the symbolic heir not just to a throne, but to a war his father tried to avoid? Because here's the thing. Children inherit more than titles. They inherit stories, rumors, trauma, expectations, and somewhere in a royal bedroom, a child awoke the morning after the decree to find a gold-sealed envelope on his desk. Inside, a parchment scroll bearing 3 names, his father's, and the one name conspicuously crossed out, his uncle's. And in that moment, history shifted, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Because the story you're about to hear, it's not just about family. It's about power, about legacy, about the silent wars behind palace walls, and about a future king who realized, perhaps too late, that blood may be thicker than water, but it can still stain. And just when you think this couldn't get more surreal, what George said next would change everything. But we'll get to that, because first, we need to enter the room where the decree was signed, and find out who else was watching. What kind of man signs away his own brother's legacy in the dead of night? And more importantly, who was in the room when he did it? Because this wasn't some ceremonial act dressed up in velvet robes and trumpets. This was a calculated, precise, quietly ruthless operation, executed not in the public eye, but behind tightly locked palace doors. And yet, something tells us this was never meant to stay a secret. Let's go inside that room. Let's go back to the moment the pen touched the parchment, and history took a sharp, irreversible turn. It was 12:03 a.m. Not a second earlier, not a second later. According to a well-placed insider, someone with direct knowledge of the events that unfolded inside Kensington Palace, Prince William entered the East Wing conference chamber dressed not in royal garb, but in something far more chilling. A plain white shirt, dark trousers, no watch, no phone, just a single document folder clutched in his left hand. He didn't speak as he entered, didn't look at the others waiting, didn't ask for tea, didn't smile. He simply sat down at the head of the mahogany table, normally reserved for family meetings and charity briefings, and opened the folder. Inside, a royal contingency protocol, codenamed Project Lantern, a document so rarely used, it had only been activated twice in the past century. Once during World War II, and once during the abdication crisis of 1936. This was no ordinary document. It was a legal blueprint, a constitutional fire escape, a way to bypass normal succession delays and reassign ceremonial duties in the event of monarchical silence. And King Charles? He was silent. Rumors had already begun to spread that the king was undergoing a second undisclosed treatment for an illness more severe than previously reported. Official palace statements remained vague, undergoing tests, resting, advised by doctors to reduce engagements. But silence speaks volumes. And William? He'd waited long enough. He turned to the three people seated across from him. The first, Sir Graham Fernley, a senior legal advisor with decades of experience in royal constitutional law. The second, Lady Arabella Worthing, keeper of the royal seals and protocols. A woman who'd served both Queen Elizabeth and King Charles with razor-sharp precision. And the third, the palace's newest security intelligence liaison, a man known only as Mr. Hemsworth, whose resume includes work with MI5 and discreet advisory roles within Parliament. Why him? Because what William was about to do wasn't just legally daring. It was dangerous. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, why would the heir to the throne, future king of the United Kingdom, need a security intelligence officer present to strip his brother of royal titles? What was he afraid of? Retaliation? Leaks? Or something deeper? Perhaps William knew that once this document was signed, it wouldn't just trigger headlines. It would trigger Harry. And in this day and age, with platforms, networks, and alliances spread across continents, one wrong move could ignite a media war with more casualties than any physical battlefield. So William prepared for war. A silent war. And his weapon? Ink. The document was titled, Transfer and Reassignment of Honorary Titles and Responsibilities under Provisional Regent Authority. It wasn't even printed on traditional royal parchment. Instead, it was printed on secure, micro-encoded polymer paper, something used when royal documents must be both signed and digitally encrypted at the same time. William began to read. Not aloud. To himself. Silently. Deliberately. The room remained still, save for the subtle hum of a secure server fan in the corner and the occasional clink of a pen cap being nervously twisted by Lady Arabella. The document was 19 pages long, dense with legal codes, historical precedent, and discreet annotations made earlier that day by William himself. Page for listed Harry's titles: Duke of Sussex, Earl of Dumbarton, Baron Kilkeel, Honorary Captain General of the Royal Marines, Commonwealth Youth Ambassador. Page 6 outlined each of their intended destinations. And at the top of that list, Prince George of Wales. A 10-year-old boy, asleep in his bed, blissfully unaware that his name was about to replace his uncle's in the eyes of the crown. Was it ceremonial? Partially. Was it symbolic? Absolutely. But more than anything, it was personal. Because buried on page 11, in a section rarely made public, was a clause with explosive potential, wherein any royal family member, having willfully disavowed primary royal duties, demonstrates a pattern of public disparagement or endangerment to the institution, the acting regent, upon constitutional delay or abdication of monarchical oversight, may exercise limited discretion to deactivate such individuals' ceremonial titles in protection of the crown's continuity. Read that again. Pattern of public disparagement. That wasn't just legalese. That was an indictment. An indictment of Oprah, of the Spotify podcast, of the Netflix docuseries, of the late-night monologues, interviews, memoir excerpts, and stage paparazzi ambushes. This wasn't about one podcast or one interview. This was about everything. And William had had enough. But here's where the story takes a darker twist. Because halfway through the signing process, William paused. He lifted his pen, looked directly at Lady Arabella, and asked a single question. Is it final? Arabella hesitated. She knew what he meant. Once the seal was affixed, the document would be registered into the royal archives, encrypted, time-stamped, and legally binding under the 1701 Act of Settlement and the revised Regency Acts. There would be no undoing it. No appeals. No royal oops. She nodded. It's final. William blinked. Once. Slowly. And signed. Then, without looking up, he pressed the seal. Clunk. Just like that, Harry's royal titles were severed, formally and officially. In a room with only 4 people, 1 pen, and no cameras. Except, there was one more twist. Because the final section of the decree, page 19, outlined something far more shocking. Something not even Arabella or Sir Graham had expected. The Sussex Contingency Addendum. A single paragraph, handwritten by William, added less than 3 hours before the meeting. It read, should the recipient of the revoked titles, namely, Prince Henry of Sussex, attempt to leverage commodify, or misrepresent said titles in commercial or public spheres following this decree. The Crown reserves the right to invoke Clause v. 22. Expungement of honorary lineage from all ceremonial archives, including but not limited to royal websites, museum exhibitions, and official biographies. In simpler terms, if Harry used Duke of Sussex in his next Netflix deal or on the cover of a memoir, he'd be wiped from the royal record entirely. No titles. No photos in state corridors. No flag in St. George's Chapel. Gone. Like he never existed. So why did William add that clause? Was it vengeance? Or protection? That's the question royal watchers still debate. But what happened next might hold the answer. Because just as William rose to leave, his face a mask of weary resolve, there was a faint knock at the chamber door. Sir Graham opened it, expecting perhaps a late-arriving aide or confused night guard. Instead, a courier entered, dressed in royal livery, holding a red velvet pouch, and inside, a sealed letter, addressed to Prince William, marked with a wax insignia that hadn't been used since Queen Elizabeth's passing. The Queen's private cipher. What was in that letter? Why had it surfaced now? And why, after reading it, did William go completely pale? The room froze. William clutched the letter for a moment, then tucked it silently into his jacket pocket and walked out. He said nothing. No one followed. And from that moment on, every single royal involved in the midnight signing was placed under a 48-hour internal gag order. No exceptions. No leaks. At least, not until now. Because we've learned what was in that letter. And it changes everything. But before we open it, you need to see what was happening on the other side of the Atlantic. Because as William was signing away his brother's legacy, Harry was about to make a move of his own. And what he did next might be the very reason William acted that night. And trust me, no one, not even Meghan, saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to see your family legacy rewritten without warning? Not in a conversation, not in a birthday toast, not even in a letter, but with a single midnight signature, a legal seal, and a silent room filled with witnesses sworn to secrecy. That was the reality on that fateful night. Because the moment Prince William affixed his pen and pressed the seal, the royal line of succession shifted. Not in whispers, not in hypotheticals, but in the stark, unforgiving ink of the law. And the ripple effects? They were immediate. Let's break it down. Traditionally, succession follows a very clear path. The oldest child inherits the throne. Titles are assigned. Duties are delegated. The line of succession is sacred, a centuries-old roadmap that even the monarchy rarely dares to alter. But William's midnight decree introduced something entirely unprecedented. The transfer of a living adult's titles to a child, bypassing the former holder entirely. Think about that for a moment. Prince George, a 10-year-old boy with no formal royal experience beyond school visits and family outings, suddenly became the legal heir to his uncle's titles. He wasn't just inheriting ceremonial titles. He was inheriting responsibility, expectation, and, perhaps most crucially, influence over the monarchy's perception in the public eye. Meanwhile, Harry, once Duke of Sussex, Earl of Dumbarton, Baron Kilkeel, and honorary Captain General of the Royal Marines, was effectively left with nothing. A placeholder in history, but stripped of his symbolic power. To many, this would seem cruel. But from William's perspective, it was tactical. You see, in the weeks leading up to the decree, William had watched Harry act in ways that could compromise the monarchy. Unsolicited interviews, public statements, media appearances that painted the family in a negative light. Every move Harry made was dissected, shared, and debated across social media, newspapers, and streaming platforms. William's solution? Preemptive action. A legal reset. A safeguard for the crown. But what does this mean for the succession itself? Titles like Duke of Sussex aren't just decorative. They come with influence over charitable organizations, ceremonial duties, military affiliations, and international recognition. By transferring these titles to George, William ensured that the next generation, not a disgraced adult, would embody the crown's image. The symbolism is staggering. Imagine George walking into a room, 10 years old, already holding the titles his father once claimed in adulthood. The world would recognize him not just as the king-in-waiting, but as the inheritor of a narrative that subtly rewrites his family history. And this isn't just ceremonial or symbolic. This is legal weight. By formally reassigning titles, William set a precedent that could be referenced in future legal and constitutional debates. Other heirs and branches of the family now have a tangible example. Royal titles can be revoked and reassigned under specific conditions. It's a silent power play that could echo for decades. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Harry's supporters, and there are many, argue that this is unprecedented, if not unconstitutional. They point to the Royal Marriages Act, the Act of Settlement, and centuries of precedents, claiming that William overstepped his authority. Others argue the opposite, that William acted within the letter of the law, using contingency clauses intended for emergencies. Legal scholars are split. Some call it a constitutional masterstroke. Others label it as an abuse of power fueled by personal vendetta. And what about the child, George? He's 10 years old. He's learning math, spelling, and how to tie his shoes. And now, he's legally the heir to titles that his uncle once wielded with decades of experience. The pressure, the expectations, the public scrutiny, it's enough to make even the most composed adult break. Kate and William, of course, are trying to shield him. Teachers are briefed. Security protocols intensified. Public appearances carefully choreographed. But make no mistake, George will grow up under the weight of a legacy that began with his father's bold, unprecedented move. Here's an interesting twist. Not all of William's advisors agreed with the decision. Sir Graham, the senior legal advisor, reportedly paused when the addendum was read aloud. "Are we certain this will hold?" he asked. William's answer was calm but firm. Yes. Legally, constitutionally, and morally, the crown's image takes precedence over sentiment. Even Arabella, keeper of the royal seals, hesitated. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she signed the document herself. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "Necessary," William replied. That word, necessary, captures the essence of the moment. The act was both protective and aggressive, calculated and emotional. And then there's the most shocking part. The clause that allows the crown to expunge Harry from all official archives if he acts against the monarchy. This is not just a legal threat. This is historical erasure. And George, legally, now holds the power that was once Harry's. Now, let's consider the global implications. Across the Atlantic, media outlets were already preparing stories about the Sussexes' recent contracts with Netflix and Spotify. Headlines were written, edited, and cued. And suddenly, overnight, the narrative shifts. The Duke of Sussex is stripped of his titles, and a 10-year-old now represents those titles internationally. Political analysts, constitutional lawyers, and royal commentators scrambled to interpret the implications. Could this affect Commonwealth recognition? Could it impact Harry's ability to represent the monarchy in legal or diplomatic contexts? The questions are endless, and answers are few. And the public? They are captivated, shocked, confused. Social media erupted within hours. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok lit up with speculation, outrage, and conspiracy theories. Memes flooded the feeds, some humorous, others biting, all reflecting a public grappling with a royal reality that felt almost cinematic. But here's the irony. While William and George now hold the upper hand legally and ceremonially, they are not untouchable. Every decision has consequences. Every move invites countermoves. And somewhere, in Montecito or wherever the Sussexes reside, Harry is not idle. He's already planning, already strategizing, already thinking 3 steps ahead. And while the world thinks this is a done deal, the reality is far more precarious. Because the line of succession is not just about titles. It's about perception, influence, and the hearts and minds of the people. And in that regard, William's bold move at midnight has only just begun to ripple. So what do you think? Was William's move genius or reckless? Did he protect his son or punish his brother? The answers aren't simple. But one thing is certain. The night of the midnight decree changed the rules of succession forever. And as George now sits at the center of this storm, every glance, every word, every public appearance will carry weight far beyond his age. And yet, for all the power William wielded, the question remains, did he foresee the full consequences of his action? Because just as the decree took effect, Harry did something unexpected. Something that would challenge the very legality and morality of William's move. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine being 10 years old and waking up one morning to discover that the world now expects more of you than you can possibly understand. That the title once held by your uncle, your father's brother, has been silently handed over to you. That your tiny hands are suddenly responsible for centuries of tradition, ceremony, and expectation. That was Prince George's reality the morning after William's midnight decree. And it wasn't gentle. Because while the document had been signed in secrecy, the implications could not remain hidden. Palace aides had already updated George's official royal profile. Titles like Earl of Dumbarton and Baron Kilkeel, previously associated with Harry, now belonged to him. And the subtle shift in ceremony, the invisible weight of responsibility, began to manifest in ways no 10-year-old should have to face. It started quietly. George's tutor noticed first. The boy, normally cheerful and curious, seemed more serious, almost burdened. During lessons, he would pause mid-sentence, staring off as if weighing the significance of something he could not yet name. "Are you feeling all right?" the tutor asked, concerned. I think so," George replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But there was a strange gravity in his tone, an understanding that his world had shifted overnight. And it wasn't just academics. Charlotte, ever perceptive, noticed her brother's newfound reticence. "Why are people talking about Uncle Harry?" she asked one evening at bedtime. "Did he do something wrong?" George shrugged. "I don't know, maybe. Dad says he's not following the rules." Louis, oblivious to the political machinations of the palace but sensitive to emotional shifts, simply frowned. "Can't he just play with us like before?" Kate and William faced a dilemma. How do you explain to a child that he now legally holds titles his uncle once bore, without frightening him or burdening him with guilt? The conversations were careful, measured, filled with metaphor and historical context. "George," Kate began one evening, "some responsibilities are not about age. They're about care, about honor, and about keeping promises to the people." George nodded silently. His mind raced. Care, honor, promises. Words adults tossed casually, but weighted with centuries of expectation. William, on the other hand, approached it differently. "George," he said, voice low and steady, "what's happened isn't about power. It's about protecting what matters. You may be young, but you now carry a legacy. It's not a choice. It's an opportunity." Opportunity. A strange word for a boy who had just learned that his uncle's world had been removed from him, replaced by George himself. An opportunity came with pressure. Because public perception, legal recognition, and ceremonial duty are not abstract concepts. They manifest in every interaction, every public appearance, every photo, every handshake. Every smile is scrutinized. Every mistake is magnified. George would feel that weight before he even fully understood what it meant to hold a pen, let alone a title. The night after the decree, George confided in his parents. "I don't want people to hate me," he said quietly. "I just want Uncle Harry to be happy too. Did I do something wrong?" Kate placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. You are a child, and your father made a choice to protect you. Your job is to learn, to grow, and to be kind. That's all." But William knew it wasn't that simple. Because George's first question, about whether he had done something wrong, was precisely the danger. The boy would internalize the weight of his inheritance. And that internalization could shape his personality, his future decisions, even his relationship with his uncle. Meanwhile, the palace was quietly adjusting protocol. Security increased. Advisors were briefed. Public relations teams prepared messaging for potential leaks. Every event George attended was now meticulously choreographed. Each step, smile, and gesture would reinforce the perception that he was the rightful holder of these titles, regardless of his age. And in the background, William watched. Because a child holding these titles is a powerful symbol, more powerful than the adult he replaced. George represented the continuity of the monarchy, a living testament that the crown endures even amid scandal and betrayal. But William also knew the risks. Children are unpredictable. Titles are symbolic, but people are human. George could react in ways no one anticipated: rebellion, confusion, fear, or even defiance. And any misstep could be weaponized by Harry or the media, turning what was meant to stabilize the monarchy into a public relations nightmare. That risk didn't stop William from moving forward. George's new responsibilities were introduced gradually. Small ceremonial duties first. Receiving dignitaries in the gardens, attending charity events, learning protocol. The symbolism was subtle but clear. The world was watching. And George, still a boy at heart, began to understand the significance of his role. But even in these small steps, there were contradictions. George's peers at school noticed the changes. Whispers in the hallways. Classmates asking questions that George didn't have answers for. "Is your dad mad at Uncle Harry?" one friend asked. "Are you really a prince now?" And George had to navigate these questions with the maturity of a 10-year-old and the poise expected of a future king. It was a delicate balance between innocence and duty, between childlike curiosity and inherited responsibility. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were unaware of the full implications. Reports indicate that Harry had been in Montecito, dealing with business matters, unaware that a legal shift had occurred thousands of miles away. Meghan, preoccupied with PR crises and streaming contracts, didn't fully grasp that George had now inherited her husband's former titles. The disconnect added tension. Across the ocean, one family was executing unprecedented power plays, while the other remained in the dark, at least temporarily. And here's the shocking twist. George himself, in a private moment, questioned the fairness of the decision. "I don't want Uncle Harry to be erased," he whispered to his tutor. "It doesn't feel right. But Dad says it's for everyone's good. I don't know." A 10-year-old, carrying centuries of expectation, questioning morality over legality. That moment, brief and unrecorded, captures the human complexity behind the royal headlines. Because titles, inheritance, and legacy are more than ceremonial, they are deeply emotional. And for George, the weight of these emotions would shape his understanding of power, responsibility, and family for years to come. Even the staff noticed. Aides whispered about the boy's unusual maturity. Teachers remarked on his thoughtful demeanor. Security personnel observed that George, though quiet, seemed aware of his symbolic role. Every glance, every word, every action mattered now. And yet, despite all this, George remained a child. He still wanted to play, to explore, to laugh. The struggle between innocence and imposed responsibility would define the next phase of the monarchy. So ask yourself, can a child truly inherit titles meant for adults? Can a society accept the symbolic authority of someone too young to vote, to lead, to understand the implications of their legacy? William's move was bold, perhaps unprecedented. But in making George the inheritor, he also placed a moral and psychological burden on a child that few could comprehend. And that's where the tension truly begins. Because while George inherited titles, he did not inherit understanding. He did not inherit preparation. And he did not inherit the right to consent. Which begs the question, how will George respond when he finally realizes the power, expectation, and scrutiny now resting on his shoulders? And what will Harry do when he discovers that his titles, his legacy, and his ceremonial influence have been quietly handed to his 10-year-old son? Because one thing is certain, power moves are never silent for long. And in this case, what comes next will shatter more than headlines. It will shake the very foundation of the royal family. What happens when a prince who once embodied hope, duty, and honor becomes a symbol of scandal, estrangement, and loss? That's the question that haunted Prince Harry as news of the Midnight Decree began to ripple across the royal and global landscape. The fall of the Duke of Sussex wasn't a sudden collapse. It was years in the making. A slow erosion of trust, image, and influence that finally reached its tipping point when William, his own brother, signed him out of the family's ceremonial hierarchy. But to understand the depth of this fall, we need to rewind. It starts with the boy who grew up in the shadows of royalty. Harry, the spare to William's heir, had always lived under two powerful forces: the intense scrutiny of the public and the unyielding expectations of the monarchy. His childhood was peppered with flashes of adoration, yes, but also loss, tragedy, and pressure. The death of Princess Diana was the first seismic event. Harry was 12 years old, and yet already being groomed to understand the weight of history, optics, and public mourning. While the world watched William step into the role of the grieving elder brother, Harry was quietly forming a narrative in his mind, a mixture of grief, frustration, and defiance. From that point onward, every move Harry made carried double weight. Military service, charitable work, public appearances, they weren't just achievements. They were evidence that he could rise above the expectations of being the spare. But as time went on, the public began to notice cracks in the narrative. Fast forward to the Sussex's exit from royal duties in 2020. Officially, it was framed as a desire for independence, for personal freedom, and to escape the pressures of the royal spotlight. Unofficially, it was a rupture, a split that divided the monarchy, media, and public opinion. Netflix deals, Spotify podcasts, media interviews that criticized palace protocol, legal battles over security and privacy. Harry and Meghan weren't just leaving. They were challenging the institution itself. For William, each headline, each public statement, each interview felt like a betrayal. Every word Harry spoke was dissected, debated, and often sensationalized, painting the royal family in a negative light. And yet, despite the mounting tension, William had held back. He tried to contain the situation, to preserve dignity, to avoid open conflict. Until the Midnight Decree. Because the decree wasn't just symbolic, it was the culmination of years of perceived transgressions. Titles like Duke of Sussex weren't just ceremonial. They were a symbol of responsibility, authority, and connection to the crown. By stripping Harry of these titles, William wasn't just sending a message. He was formally demoting his brother from the royal hierarchy. Publicly, it looked like legal housekeeping. Privately, it was a statement, one that would reverberate across continents. But let's pause for a moment. How does a public figure process such a fall? Harry's first reaction, according to sources close to him, was disbelief. Shock. Hurt. He couldn't comprehend it, said a friend. It was like watching someone wipe away part of your identity while you were asleep. It's deeply personal and deeply humiliating. Humiliation isn't a word often associated with royalty, but in this context, it fits. Titles aren't just names. They are the shorthand for recognition, honor, and legacy. And Harry, who had built a life and career around those titles, suddenly found them stripped away. And the public fallout? Immediate. Media outlets around the world picked up the story within hours. Headlines screamed, Duke of Sussex stripped of titles. Royal family power shift. George inherits Uncle Harry's roles. Prince Harry erased from ceremonial records. Social media exploded. Twitter threads dissected every nuance. Instagram influencers posted infographics showing the legal pathways of the decree. TikTok creators dramatized the moment as if it were a scene from a royal drama series. Harry's reputation, carefully cultivated over years, began to fray. But here's the twist. Harry didn't just face the loss of titles. He faced isolation. Because even allies were hesitant to speak. Some advisors feared legal repercussions. Some friends feared media backlash. And for those who remained loyal, the risk of public scrutiny was real. Harry's support network shrank, leaving him exposed, not just to the public eye, but to his own doubts and insecurities. And that's when the psychological weight began to build. Friends noticed changes almost immediately. He became more withdrawn in private calls. His humor, once sharp and endearing, turned bitter. He questioned alliances. He doubted motives. He was trying to stay strong, said a former aide. But the loss of titles hit him harder than anyone could anticipate. It wasn't just symbolic. It was personal. It was family. And for someone so accustomed to serving, being stripped of roles felt like being erased. Let's talk about the symbolism for a moment. Titles like Duke of Sussex weren't just honorific. They were linked to charities, military roles, and public service. Harry had invested years into these positions. He had spoken at events, launched initiatives, and represented the monarchy abroad. Now all that work, in the eyes of the crown, was effectively transferred to a child, a 10-year-old who had yet to understand the nuance, the responsibility, or the history behind each role. Imagine the frustration, the feeling that one's achievements are dismissed, not for incompetence, but for the sake of legacy preservation. That's the fall Harry experienced. And yet, Harry didn't stay silent for long. Within hours, he reportedly reached out to legal counsel in the UK and the US. exploring avenues to challenge the decree. Potential breaches of constitutional law. Potential violations of historical precedent. Opportunities to publicly reclaim ceremonial rights. But here's the catch. These titles had already been reassigned. The law, as interpreted by William's advisors, was technically airtight. Any legal challenge would be long, complex, and fraught with risk. Meanwhile, Harry's media team scrambled to craft messaging, damage control, statements that wouldn't inflame tensions further. Yet every draft carried the invisible weight of being a response to an action he couldn't undo. And Meghan? She was furious. Reports indicate she demanded immediate action. Phone calls to advisors, threats of public statements, pressure on media outlets, calls to former royal allies abroad. Yet William remained unmoved, calm, calculated. The narrative was no longer about Harry alone. It was about the monarchy's survival, about succession, and about preserving the image of the crown through the next generation. And Harry's fall, once private, became a public spectacle. So, the question becomes, is this punishment or protection? Is William's midnight decree an act of calculated defense, or is it a deeply personal retaliation? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Harry had acted publicly against family, repeatedly. William had chosen secrecy and legality over confrontation. The titles were gone. The legacy shifted, and George now represented both the future and the symbolic reassertion of royal continuity. But even as Harry processed the fall, one critical element remained outside William's control: public perception. Supporters of Harry quickly framed him as the victim. Critics framed him as reckless. Media outlets debated whether William overstepped his bounds. And across social media, heated arguments erupted about morality, family loyalty, and the meaning of duty. Harry had lost titles, yes, but the narrative war had just begun. And the final twist? Harry's fall was not complete, because even stripped of his titles, he retained influence over the very institutions William sought to protect. Charitable connections, celebrity reach, international visibility. The same platforms that William had sought to control were now in Harry's hands. And that's when the danger became clear. William had assumed that removing titles would neutralize threat. But influence isn't bound by paper. Influence is in perception, relationships, and action. And Harry, hurt, strategic, and deeply motivated, was already plotting his next move. A move that could challenge the legality, morality, and symbolism of William's decree. And when that move comes, the monarchy will not just feel it, it will be shaken to its core. Imagine hearing news that shakes the very foundation of your life. Only you're thousands of miles away, and the person who delivered the blow is your spouse's brother. That was Meghan Markle in the hours following Prince William's midnight decree. Reports from Montecito suggest she received the news in a series of frantic, fragmented updates from royal aides and international media. No official call, no warning, just the slow drip of information that turned into a flood. Harry's titles had been stripped. Prince George had inherited them, and the legal and ceremonial landscape of the monarchy had been altered while she slept. He did what? She reportedly yelled at her assistant, who was trying, and failing, to explain the situation calmly. Her reaction was a mix of shock, disbelief, and raw anger. And yet, beneath the fury, there was fear. Because Meghan knew this wasn't just about Harry's titles. This was about influence, about legacy, about control. And the ripple effects could touch everything, from their charitable foundation to media contracts to international perception. The first calls were a blur. Lawyers, PR strategists, Netflix representatives, advisors in London. Meghan's fingers flew across her phone, connecting with anyone who could help her understand the scope of William's move. Every conversation began the same way. Are you serious? Did this really happen? And every answer reinforced the truth. Yes. The Duke of Sussex had lost his titles. George had gained them, and the world had already begun to take notice. But Meghan's reaction wasn't just tactical, it was personal. She felt the sting of betrayal, not just professionally, but emotionally. For years, she had navigated the complexities of royalty with Harry by her side. Together, they had faced scrutiny, criticism, and pressure from the public and the press. And now, without warning, A silent decision by William had reshaped their family hierarchy in a way that marginalized Harry's contributions, and by extension, hers. Meghan reportedly spent the first hour pacing her home, phone to ear, voice trembling between controlled outrage and near hysteria. "He's gone too far," she said to one royal insider. "This isn't just about titles. It's about our lives, our work, everything we've built." Strategically, she had to act. Her team immediately began drafting responses, framing the narrative, and planning potential legal challenges. They explored every possible angle: international law, British constitutional precedent, historical succession clauses. Each pathway, however, carried risks. Legal challenges could inflame media attention, provoke further retaliation, or even jeopardize Harry's remaining influence within the monarchy. Yet despite the professional focus, Meghan couldn't ignore the emotional element. Anger, betrayal, fear. These were constant companions in her thoughts. The kind of anger that fuels sleepless nights and relentless strategizing. And at the same time, the protective instinct for Harry and their children, Archie and Lilibet, loomed large. Sources suggest Meghan considered reaching out directly to William, to confront him, to demand answers, to plead for fairness. But she hesitated. For one, she feared escalating the conflict. William, after all, had executed the decree with precision, legality, and absolute confidence. Any confrontation could provoke a countermeasure. For another, Meghan understood the stakes. Public appearances, media narratives, and social perception were all on a knife's edge. One wrong move, and the narrative could be turned against them. Instead, Meghan did what she often does in crises. She strategized. She analyzed. She built contingency plans. Every potential response, every possible media angle, and every legal pathway was examined. And yet, beneath all the strategy, there was a deeply human reaction: hurt. The emotional toll was evident in private moments. A friend close to Meghan reported that she spent much of the following night in tears. Not the silent, controlled tears one might expect from a public figure, but deep, aching tears born of betrayal and the fear of losing control over her family's legacy. She asked questions that had no easy answers. How could he do this without telling us? What message does this send to our children? Have we really been erased? And yet, even in these moments of vulnerability, Meghan's resilience shone. She began planning a response, not just to defend Harry's reputation, but to protect the narrative surrounding their family and foundation. Interestingly, Meghan's anger didn't just focus on William. It extended to the entire system. The advisors, the legal teams, the palace staff who facilitated or failed to prevent the Midnight Decree. There was a sense of betrayal not just from a brother-in-law, but from an institution she had tried to navigate with respect and caution. Conversations reportedly included pointed questions. Who authorized this? Why wasn't I informed? Was this in the best interest of the children? Each question revealed layers of complexity and emotional intensity that few outside the family could truly comprehend. Meanwhile, Harry's own response was shaping up in parallel. He was furious, confused, determined, and Meghan, as always, played a central role in advising, strategizing, and grounding him. Their partnership, already tested by years of public scrutiny, became even more critical in the face of William's unilateral decision. They held emergency meetings with lawyers in the US and UK, exploring whether there were loopholes, precedents, or international angles that could challenge the decree. Every step, however, reminded them of one uncomfortable reality. William had acted within the legal framework, and the palace had covered its tracks with meticulous precision. Even in the midst of strategic planning, Meghan didn't lose sight of the emotional stakes. Her concern for Archie and Lilibet intensified. How would these events affect their perception of family? Of royalty? Of their father? Of their uncle? Could children so young understand that the world had shifted in ways beyond their control? Meghan reportedly confided to a close friend, "I can't let them grow up thinking their father, or uncle, is powerless. I won't let them feel that helplessness." It was a striking combination of vulnerability and resolve, anger and protection, fear and strategy, all coexisting in one person as she navigated a crisis that few outside the palace could fully grasp. And then came the media storm. Even as Meghan and Harry worked behind the scenes, news outlets across the world reported on the title transfers. Headlines varied, from neutral factual reporting to sensationalized narratives implying betrayal, familial strife, and unprecedented royal conflict. Social media amplified the outrage, dissecting every word of palace statements and every rumored phone call. Meghan, true to form, remained engaged. She monitored reports, assessed impact, and made decisions designed to protect her family's image while also preparing for potential public statements. Her approach combined legal precision with emotional intelligence, a balancing act few could master under such intense scrutiny. But the pressure wasn't just external. Within the family, whispers began to circulate. Allegiances were tested. Advisors who once appeared neutral were now subtly aligning. And Meghan, aware of these undercurrents, recognized that the battle wasn't solely about titles. It was about perception, loyalty, and narrative control. Her strategic mind saw the long game. Every move, every public appearance, every statement would be scrutinized, and the risk of misstep was enormous. Yet in the midst of this storm, Meghan found clarity. She would act. She would protect her family. She would ensure that Harry's legacy, though legally challenged, was not erased from public consciousness. And she would do it with the same combination of grace, precision, and determination that had defined her every challenge in the past. And here's the twist that no one expected. Sources reveal that Meghan made a private call to a royal insider she had cultivated over the years. Someone with deep knowledge of palace operations, someone capable of influencing narratives and clarifying legal interpretations. This call, quiet and discreet, was not just a plea. It was a calculated move that could shift the balance of power, even in the shadow of William's midnight decree. But the consequences of that call would take days to reveal. Because in the palace, as in life, every action has a ripple, and the echoes of Meghan's reaction were only beginning to be felt. And just when it seemed the storm had reached its peak, another development arrived, a revelation from inside the royal archives that even Meghan hadn't anticipated. Something that could redefine not just Harry's fall, but the very structure of royal succession and the narrative surrounding the Sussexes. What if the most explosive secret of all wasn't in the midnight decree itself, but hidden in the Queen's own handwriting? A document long thought lost, tucked away in a forgotten drawer, overlooked by history, and only discovered after the seismic events surrounding the Sussex titles. This is the story of the hidden letter left by Queen Elizabeth, a letter that would make even the most seasoned palace advisors pause and reconsider everything they thought they knew about succession, loyalty, and family. It was discovered by Lady Arabella Worthing, the keeper of the royal seals, during a routine archival audit. The Queen's desk in Buckingham Palace, a massive mahogany structure polished by decades of ritual, had been examined hundreds of times over the years. But during preparations for a ceremonial transfer of royal documentation to secure vaults, Arabella noticed a thin envelope tucked behind a false panel in the desk drawer. It was small, cream-colored, wax-sealed, unlabeled, yet the seal carried the unmistakable insignia of Queen Elizabeth herself. A crown resting above her initials, pressed carefully into crimson wax. The date on the letter? June 2018, 3 years before Harry and Meghan's Sussex departure, long before the midnight decree. Arabella's heart raced. She knew immediately this was not just correspondence. It was a personal directive, potentially containing instructions, warnings, or preferences regarding the line of succession. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, precise, yet tinged with an intimacy rarely seen in official documents. The letter addressed William, Harry, and the broader royal family, emphasizing loyalty, prudence, and the protection of the crown above personal ambition. A few key excerpts stand out. My dearest sons, in matters of duty, loyalty, and inheritance, you must always place the crown above self. The path may be treacherous, but the preservation of the monarchy requires clarity, courage, and, at times, painful decisions. Let neither anger nor resentment cloud your judgment. Titles are not merely symbols. They are responsibilities, and they must never be wielded for personal gain. Even reading this, one could sense the weight of decades of experience, diplomacy, and foresight. The Queen had anticipated tension, potential conflicts, and the very scenario that ultimately unfolded. But here's where it gets complicated. The letter contained a striking clause, almost prophetic. Should either of you diverge publicly from duty or disparage the institution, the other may, with discretion, exercise limited measures to protect the continuity of the monarchy, provided all actions are reversible and justly recorded. No action should compromise the unity of the family beyond repair. The wording was both legal and moral. It allowed for intervention, protection of the crown, but it also included a safeguard, reversibility, and unity. This is crucial. Because William's midnight decree, as meticulously planned as it was, did not include the word reversible, and therein lay the first crack. The implications were immediate and profound. If the letter had been considered, William could have invoked guidance directly from the Queen, rather than executing a unilateral legal maneuver. The decree, while legal, might be considered morally questionable when measured against her explicit instructions. But William claimed ignorance of the letter's existence. Arabella, privy to the discovery, reportedly debated whether to disclose it immediately. The timing was precarious. Revealing the letter could empower Harry's team, complicate the legal standing of the decree, and potentially ignite another family crisis. Remaining silent, however, risked ignoring the Queen's explicit intentions. Ultimately, Arabella chose caution. The letter was filed securely, noted only in the private logs of senior palace advisors. Its contents would remain confidential, at least for the moment. Yet the mere existence of the letter set off an internal domino effect. Palace staff began speculating. Had the Queen foreseen William's actions? Did she anticipate Harry's public challenges? Could she have imagined that titles might one day be stripped in secrecy? Some advisors argued that the Queen's foresight implicitly justified William's decree. Others claimed it made his action reckless, even disrespectful. The tension inside the palace became palpable. Conversations were whispered in corridors. Security was heightened. Advisors avoided eye contact, unsure of how much they should reveal to their respective factions. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan remained unaware. Had they known of the letter, they might have leveraged it to argue that William's actions contravened the Queen's explicit guidance. They might have claimed that the decree, while legally binding, ignored the moral and ethical framework established by the late monarch. The discovery, therefore, was a silent game-changer, a hidden lever that could tilt the balance if revealed at the right, or wrong, moment. There's another twist. The letter contained a subtle codicil, almost invisible in its placement, which referenced a historical precedent. Remember the example of Edward VIII. Titles, influence, and position can be wielded destructively if emotion overrides duty. Always weigh familial loyalty against the crown's longevity. Never allow private grievance to dictate public consequence. Edward VIII, of course, abdicated for love, setting a precedent for tension between personal desire and royal duty. By invoking this example, Queen Elizabeth highlighted the delicate balance her sons were expected to maintain, especially in situations involving their own siblings. In other words, the Queen anticipated conflict between William and Harry, perhaps even of the type that occurred during the Midnight Decree. And yet, here's the most chilling part. William's signature on the decree effectively bypassed this moral safeguard. He had acted decisively to protect the monarchy, yet in doing so, he might have contravened the Queen's explicit guidance to preserve family unity. A legal victory, a moral conundrum. And for George, the hidden letter meant that the young prince inherited not just his uncle's titles, but also the silent weight of a family history riddled with complexity. The morality of the actions surrounding him, decisions he had no part in, would shape his understanding of duty, loyalty, and justice for years to come. At this point, palace advisors realized that the letter introduced a new variable into an already volatile situation. Discretion became paramount. Every word, every document, every decision was scrutinized. What was previously a straightforward legal maneuver now became a delicate dance between legality, morality, and public perception. And somewhere in Montecito, Meghan's team continued planning, unaware that a hidden lever existed, one that could dramatically alter their approach to the unfolding crisis. So the question arises, if William had known about the Queen's letter, would he have acted differently? Would he have included a clause for reversibility, consulted with Harry, or perhaps reconsidered altogether? The answer is unknown, but one thing is clear. The letter added a layer of complexity that no one, not even the Duke of Sussex or the Duchess of Sussex, could ignore forever, because secrets in the monarchy rarely stay hidden. And this letter, once revealed, would have the potential to upend everything: the decree, the titles, the perceived balance of power, and the fragile public image of a family already in turmoil. And then, just when it seemed the situation couldn't become more explosive, another development arrived. An internal palace source discovered that the letter, while addressed to William and Harry, also contained a hidden postscript, a line written in nearly invisible ink, visible only under certain lighting conditions. It read, "Let not the shadows of the present obscure the light of the future. Even those who fall may rise again, if guided wisely and with humility." A warning? A prophecy? A plea for reconciliation? Whatever it meant, one thing was undeniable. The Queen had foreseen the potential for family fracture. She had anticipated rebellion, estrangement, and conflict, and had left behind a message that demanded careful interpretation. And yet, in the chaos of the midnight decree, that message remained hidden. For now. But just as the discovery of the Queen's letter added layers of moral and historical complexity, another twist was brewing. One that would involve the very media outlets Meghan and Harry relied upon, potentially giving the Sussexes an unexpected advantage. And what came next would begin a chain of events that could challenge not only William's decree, but the narrative of the fall of the Duke of Sussex himself.